The Mediterranean Sea is a sea connected to the Atlantic Ocean, surrounded by the Mediterranean Basin, and almost completely enclosed by land. On the north by Southern Europe and Anatolia, on the south by North Africa, and on the east by the Levant. The sea is sometimes considered a part of the Atlantic Ocean, although it is usually identified as a separate body of water. The name Mediterranean is derived from the Latin mediterraneus, meaning inland, or in the middle of land. It covers an approximate area of 2.5 million square kilometers, but its connection to the Atlantic is only 14 kilometers wide. The Strait of Gibraltar is a narrow strait that connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea and separates Gibraltar and Spain in Europe from Morocco in Africa. In oceanography, it is sometimes called the Euro-African Mediterranean Sea or the European Mediterranean Sea to distinguish it from Mediterranean seas elsewhere. The Mediterranean Sea has an average depth of 1,500 meters and the deepest recorded point is 5,267 meters in the Calypso Deep in the Ionian Sea. The sea is bordered on the north by Europe, the east by Asia, and in the south by Africa. It is located between latitudes 30 degrees and 46 degrees north and longitudes 6 degrees west and 36 degrees east. Its west-east length, from the Strait of Gibraltar to the Gulf of Iskenderun on the southwestern coast of Turkey, is approximately 4,000 kilometers. The sea's average north-south length, from Croatia's southern shore to Libya, is approximately 800 kilometers. The Mediterranean Sea, including the Sea of Marmara, has a surface area of approximately 2,510,000 square km. The sea was an important route for merchants and travelers of ancient times that allowed for trade and cultural exchange between emergent peoples of the region. The history of the Mediterranean region is crucial to understanding the origins and development of many modern societies. The countries with coastlines on the Mediterranean Sea are Albania, Algeria, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, Cyprus, Egypt, France, Greece, Israel, Italy, Lebanon, Libya, Malta, Morocco, Monaco, Montenegro, Slovenia, Spain, Syria, Tunisia, and Turkey. In addition, Palestine's Gaza Strip and the British overseas territories of Gibraltar and Akrotiri and Achalia have coastlines on the sea. Name. The term Mediterranean derives from the Latin word mediterraneus, meaning amid the earth or between land, as it is between the continents of Africa, Asia and Europe. The ancient Greek name Messagios is similarly from mu epsilon sigma omicron, between plus gamma eta, land, earth. It can be compared with the ancient Greek name Mesopotamia, meaning between rivers. The Mediterranean Sea has historically had several names. For example, the Carthaginians called it the Syrian Sea, and later Romans commonly called it Mare Nostrum, and occasionally Mare Internum. In ancient Syrian texts, Phoenician epics and in the Hebrew Bible, it was primarily known as the Great Sea, or simply the Sea. However, it has also been called the Hinder Sea, due to its location on the west coast of Greater Syria of the Holy Land, and therefore behind a person facing the east, sometimes translated as Western Sea. Another name was the Sea of the Philistines, from the people inhabiting a large portion of its shores near the Israelites. The sea is also called the Great Sea in the general prologue by Geoffrey Chaucer. In Ottoman Turkish, it has also been called Bahr-i Safed, meaning the pure white sea. In modern Hebrews, it has been called Hayam Hartikon, the Middle Sea, reflecting the sea's name in ancient Greek, Latin, and modern languages in both Europe and the Middle East. Similarly, in modern Arabic, it is known as Al-Bahr al-Mutawasit, the Middle Sea, while in Islamic and older Arabic literature, it was referenced as Bahr al-Rum, or the Romaic Byzantine Sea. In Turkish, it is known as Akdeniz, the White Sea, since among Turks the white color represents the West. History. Ancient civilizations. Several ancient civilizations were located around the Mediterranean shores, and were greatly influenced by the proximity to the sea. It provided routes for trade, colonization, and war, as well as food for numerous communities throughout the ages. Due to the shared climate, geology, and access to the sea, cultures centered on the Mediterranean tended to have some extent of intertwined culture and history. Two of the most notable Mediterranean civilizations in classical antiquity were the Greek city-states and the Phoenicians, both of which extensively colonized the coastlines of the Mediterranean. Later, when Augustus founded the Roman Empire, the Romans referred to the Mediterranean as Mare Nostrum. Darius I of Persia, who conquered ancient Egypt, built a canal linking the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. Darius's canal was wide enough for two triremes to pass each other with oars extended, and required 4 days to traverse. Middle Ages and Empires. The Western Roman Empire collapsed around AD 476. Temporarily, the East was again dominant as the Byzantine Empire formed from the eastern half of the Roman Empire. Another power arose in the 7th century, and with it the religion of Islam, which soon swept across from the east at its greatest extent. The Arab Empire controlled 75% of the Mediterranean region and left a lasting footprint on its eastern and southern shores. Europe was reviving, however, as more organized and centralized states began to form in the later Middle Ages after the Renaissance of the 12th century. Ottoman power continued to grow, and in 1453, the Byzantine Empire was extinguished with the conquest of Constantinople. Ottomans gained control of much of the sea in the 16th century and maintained naval bases in southern France, Algeria, and Tunisia. Barbarossa, the famous Ottoman captain, is a symbol of this domination with the victory of the Battle of Preveza. The Battle of Djerba marked the apex of Ottoman naval domination in the Mediterranean. As the naval prowess of the European powers increased, they confronted Ottoman expansion in the region when the Battle of Lepanto checked the power of the Ottoman navy. This was the last naval battle to be fought primarily between Gallists. The Barbary pirates of North Africa preyed on Christian shipping in the western Mediterranean Sea. According to Robert Davis, from the 16th to 19th centuries, pirates captured 1 million to 1.25 million Europeans as slaves. The development of oceanic shipping began to affect the entire Mediterranean. Once, all trade from the east had passed through the region, but now the circumnavigation of Africa allowed spices and other goods to be imported through the Atlantic ports of Western Europe. 21st century and migrations. In 2013, the Maltese president described the Mediterranean Sea as a cemetery due to the large amounts of migrants who drown there after the boats capsize. European Parliament President Martin Schulz said that Europe's migration policy has turned the Mediterranean into a graveyard, referring to the number of drowned refugees in the region as a direct result of the policies. An Azerbaijani official described the sea as a burial ground, where people die. Following the 2013 Lampedusa migrant shipwreck, the Italian government decided to strengthen the national system for the patrolling of the Mediterranean Sea by authorizing Mare Nostrum, a military and humanitarian mission in order to rescue the migrants and arrest the traffickers of immigrants. Geography. The Mediterranean Sea is connected to the Atlantic Ocean by the Strait of Gibraltar in the west western to the Sea of Marmara and the Black Sea, by the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus respectively. In the east, the Sea of Marmara is often considered a part of the Mediterranean Sea, whereas the Black Sea is generally not. The 163 kilometers long artificial Suez Canal in the southeast connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. Large islands in the Mediterranean include Cyprus, Crete, Euboea, Rhodes, Lesbos, Chios, Cephalonia, Corfu, Lemnos, Samos, Naxos and Andros in the eastern Mediterranean, Sardinia, Corsica, Sicily, Crescent, KRK, Brac, Hvar, Pag, Corcula and Malta in the central Mediterranean, and Ibiza, Majorca and Menorca in the western Mediterranean. The typical Mediterranean climate has hot, humid, and dry summers and mild, rainy winters. Crops of the region include olives, grapes, oranges, tangerines, and cork. The International Hydrographic Organization defines the limits of the Mediterranean Sea as follows: stretching from the Strait of Gibraltar in the west to the entrances to the Dardanelles and the Suez Canal in the east. The Mediterranean Sea is bounded by the coasts of Europe, Africa and Asia and is divided into two deep basins: Western Basin on the west, a line joining the extremities of Cape Trafalgar and Cape Spartel. On the northeast, the west coast of Italy. In the Strait of Messina, a line joining the north extreme of Cape Paci with Cape Peloro, the east extreme of the island of Sicily. The north coast of Sicily. On the east, a line joining Cape Lilibeo, the western point of Sicily, through the Adventure Bank to Cape Bon. Eastern Basin. On the west, the northeastern and eastern limits of the Western Basin. On the northeast, a line joining Cumcale and Cape Helles, the western entrance to the Dardanelles. On the southeast, the entrance to the Suez Canal. On the east, the coasts of Syria and Palestine. Oceanography being nearly landlocked affects conditions in the Mediterranean Sea. For instance, tides are very limited as a result of the narrow connection with the Atlantic Ocean. The Mediterranean is characterized and immediately recognized by its deep blue color. Evaporation greatly exceeds precipitation and river runoff in the Mediterranean, a fact that is central to the water circulation within the basin. Evaporation is especially high in its eastern half, causing the water level to decrease and salinity to increase eastward. The salinity at 5 meters depth is 3.8%. The pressure gradient pushes relatively cool, low salinity water from the Atlantic across the basin. It warms and becomes saltier as it travels east, then sinks in the region of the Levant and circulates westward to spill over the Strait of Gibraltar. Thus, seawater flow is eastward in the strait surface waters, and westward below, once in the Atlantic. This chemically distinct Mediterranean intermediate water can persist thousands of kilometers away from its source. Coastal countries. The following countries have a coastline on the Mediterranean Sea: northern shore, Spain, France, Monaco, Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Albania, Greece and Turkey. Eastern shore, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Israel. Southern shore, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt. Island nations, Malta, Cyprus. Several other territories also border the Mediterranean Sea: the British Overseas Territory of Gibraltar, the Spanish autonomous cities of Ceuta and Melilla and nearby islands, the sovereign base areas on Cyprus, and the State of Palestine's Gaza Strip. Major cities with populations larger than 200,000 people bordering the Mediterranean Sea are subdivisions according to the International Hydrographic Organization. The Mediterranean Sea is subdivided into a number of smaller water bodies, each with their own designation: the Strait of Gibraltar, the Alboran Sea, between Spain and Morocco, the Balearic Sea, between mainland Spain and its Balearic Islands, The Ligurian Sea between Corsica and Liguria. The Tyrrhenian Sea enclosed by Sardinia, Italian peninsula and Sicily. The Ionian Sea between Italy, Albania and Greece. The Adriatic Sea between Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro and Albania. The Aegean Sea between Greece and Turkey. Other seas. Although not recognized by the IHO treaties, there are some other seas whose names have been in common use from the ancient times, or in the present. The Sea of Sardinia, between Sardinia and Balearic Islands, as a part of the Balearic Sea. The Sea of Sicily between Sicily and Tunisia. The Libyan Sea between Libya and Crete. In the Aegean Sea, the Thracian Sea in its north, the Myrtoan Sea between the Cyclades and the Peloponnese, the Sea of Crete north of Crete, the Icarian Sea between Kos and Chios, the Cilician Sea between Turkey and Cyprus, the Levantine Sea at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. Other features. Many of these smaller seas feature in local myth and folklore and derive their names from these associations. In addition to the seas, a number of gulfs and straits are also recognized. The St. George Bay in Beirut, Lebanon. The Ras Ibn Hani Cape in Latakia, Syria. The Ras Al Basat Cape in northern Syria, the Minat El Baida Bay near ancient Ugarit, Syria. The Strait of Gibraltar connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea and separates Spain from Morocco. The Bay of Gibraltar at the southern end of the Iberian Peninsula. The Gulf of Corinth, an enclosed sea between the Ionian Sea and the Corinth Canal. The Pagasetic Gulf, the Gulf of Volos, south of the Thermaic Gulf, formed by the Mount Pelion Peninsula. The Saronic Gulf, the Gulf of Athens, between the Corinth Canal and the Myrtoan Sea. The Thermaic Gulf, the Gulf of Thessaloniki, located in the northern Greek region of Macedonia. The Kavana Gulf, Croatia. The Gulf of Lion, south of France. The Gulf of Valencia, east of Spain. The Strait of Messina, between Sicily and the toe of Italy. The Gulf of Genoa, northwestern Italy. The Gulf of Venice, northeastern Italy. The Gulf of Trieste, northeastern Italy. The Gulf of Taranto, southern Italy. The Gulf of Salerno, southwestern Italy. The Gulf of Gaeta, southwestern Italy. The Gulf of Squillace, southern Italy. The Strait of Otranto, between Italy and Albania. The Gulf of Haifa, northern Israel. The Gulf of Sidra, between Tripolitania and Cyrenaica. The Strait of Sicily, between Sicily and Tunisia. The Corsica Channel, between Corsica and Italy. The Strait of Bonifacio, between Sardinia and Corsica. The Gulf of Iskenderun, between Iskenderun and Adana. The Gulf of Antalya, between west and east shores of Antalya. The Bay of Kota, in southwestern Montenegro and southeastern Croatia. The Malta Channel, between Sicily and Malta. The Gozo Channel, between Malta Island and Gozo. 10 largest islands by area. Climate, sea temperature. Geology. The geologic history of the Mediterranean Sea is complex, underlain by oceanic crust. The sea basin was once thought to be a tectonic remnant of the ancient Tethys Ocean. It is now known to be a structurally younger basin, called the Neo-Tethys, which was first formed by the convergence of the African and Eurasian plates during the late Triassic and early Jurassic. Because it is a near-landlocked body of water in a normally dry climate, the Mediterranean is subject to intensive evaporation and the precipitation of evaporites. The Messinian salinity crisis started about 6 million years ago when the Mediterranean became landlocked, and then essentially dried up. There are salt deposits accumulated on the bottom of the basin of more than 1 million cubic kilometers, in some places more than 3 kilometers, thick. Scientists estimate that the sea was last filled about 5.3 million years ago in less than 2 years by the Zanclane flood. Water poured in from the Atlantic Ocean through a newly breached gateway now called the Strait of Gibraltar at an estimated rate of about 3 orders of magnitude larger than the current flow of the Amazon River. The Mediterranean Sea has an average depth of 1,500 meters and the deepest recorded point is 5,267 meters in the Calypso Deep in the Ionian Sea. The coastline extends for 46,000 kilometers. A shallow submarine ridge between the island of Sicily and the coast of Tunisia divides the sea in two main subregions. The Western Mediterranean, with an area of about 850,000 square kilometers, and the Eastern Mediterranean of about 1.65 million square kilometers. A characteristic of the coastal Mediterranean are submarine karst springs of rilges, which discharge pressurized groundwater into the coastal seawater from below the surface. The discharge water is usually fresh, and sometimes may be thermal. Tectonics and paleo-environmental analysis. The Mediterranean Basin and sea system was established by the ancient African-Arabian continent colliding with the Eurasian continent. As Africa-Arabia drifted northward, it closed over the ancient Tethys Ocean, which had earlier separated the two supercontinents Laurasia and Gondwana. At about that time in the Middle Jurassic period, a much smaller sea basin, dubbed the Neo-Tethys, was formed shortly before the Tethys Ocean closed at its western end. The broad line of collisions pushed up a very long system of mountains from the Pyrenees in Spain to the Zagros Mountains in Iran in an episode of mountain-building tectonics known as the Alpine orogeny. The Neo-Tethys grew larger during the episodes of collisions that occurred during the Oligocene and Miocene epochs. See animation. Africa-Arabia colliding with Eurasia. Accordingly, the Mediterranean Basin consists of several stretched tectonic plates in subduction which are the foundation of the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. Various zones of subduction harbor and formed the deepest and most majestic oceanic ridges east of the Ionian Sea and south of the Aegean. The Central Indian Ridge runs east of the Mediterranean Sea southeast across the in-between of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula into the Indian Ocean. Nevertheless, while man-made geopolitical turmoil and chaos have governed the coastlines of many various Mediterranean nations throughout the courses of ancient, modern, present and foreseeable history, the plate tectonic status of nations bordering the Mediterranean Sea will find sharing the same geological concerns and fate. Messinian salinity crisis. During Mesozoic and Cenozoic times, as the northwest corner of Africa converged on Iberia, it lifted the Betic Rift mountain belts across southern Iberia and northwest Africa. The development of the intramontane Betic and Rift basins led to creating two roughly parallel marine gateways between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea, dubbed the Betic and Riften corridors. They progressively closed during Middle and Late Miocene times, perhaps several times. During Late Miocene times, the closure of the Betic corridor triggered the so-called Messinian salinity crisis, when the Mediterranean almost entirely dried out. The time of beginning of the MSC was recently estimated astronomically at 5.96 Maya, and it persisted for some 630,000 years until about 5.3 Maya. See animation. Messinian salinity crisis. At right after the initial drawdown and reflooding that followed more episodes. The total number is debated of sea drawdowns and refloodings for the duration of the MSC. It ended when the Atlantic Ocean last reflooded the basin, creating the Strait of Gibraltar and causing the Zanclane flood at the end of the Miocene. Some research has suggested that the desiccation-flooding-desiccation cycle may have repeated several times, which could explain several events of large amounts of salt deposition. Recent studies, however, show that repeated desiccation and reflooding is unlikely from a geodynamic point of view. Desiccation and exchanges of flora and fauna of the present-day Atlantic Gateway, i.e., the Strait of Gibraltar, originated in the early Pliocene via the Zanclane flood. As mentioned, two other gateways preceded Gibraltar, the Betic Corridor across southern Spain and the Rifan Corridor across northern Morocco. The former gateway closed about 6 miles, causing the Messinian salinity crisis. The latter, possibly both gateways, closed during the earlier Tortonian times, causing a Tortonian salinity crisis, which occurred well before the MSC lasted much longer. Both crises resulted in broad connections of the mainlands of Africa and Europe, which thereby normalized migrations of flora and fauna, especially large mammals including primates, between the two continents. The Valesian crisis indicates a typical extinction and replacement of mammal species in Europe during Tortonian times following climatic upheaval, and overland migrations of new species. See animation. Messinian salinity crisis. At right, the near completely enclosed configuration of the Mediterranean Basin has enabled the oceanic gateways to dominate seawater circulation and the environmental evolution of the sea-in basin. Circulation patterns are also affected by several other factors, including climate, bathymetry, and water chemistry and temperature, which are interactive and can induce precipitation of evaporites. Deposits of evaporites accumulated earlier in the nearby Carpathian Foredeep during the Middle Miocene and the adjacent Red Sea Basin, and in the whole Mediterranean Basin. Diatomites are regularly found underneath the evaporite deposits, suggesting a connection between the genesis. Today, evaporation of surface seawater is more than the supply of fresh water by precipitation and coastal drainage systems, causing the salinity of the Mediterranean to be much higher than that of the Atlantic, so much so that the saltier Mediterranean waters sink below the waters incoming from the Atlantic, causing a two-layer flow across the Gibraltar Strait, that is, an outflow submarine current of warm saline Mediterranean water, counterbalanced by an inflow surface current of less saline cold oceanic water from the Atlantic. Hermann Sorgel's Atlantropa project proposal in the 1920s proposed a hydroelectric dam to be built across the Strait of Gibraltar, using the inflow current to provide a large amount of hydroelectric energy. The underlying energy grid was as well intended to support a political union between Europe and, at least, the Maghreb part of Africa. Shift to a Mediterranean climate. The end of the Miocene also marked a change in the climate of the Mediterranean Basin. Fossil evidence from that period reveals that the larger basin had a humid subtropical climate with rainfall in the summer supporting laurel forests. The shift to a Mediterranean climate occurred largely within the last 3 million years as summer rainfall decreased. The subtropical laurel forests retreated, and even as they persisted on the islands of Macaronesia off the Atlantic coast of Iberia and North Africa, the present Mediterranean vegetation evolved, dominated by coniferous trees and sclerophyllous trees and shrubs with small, hard, waxy leaves that prevent moisture loss in the dry summers. Much of these forests and shrublands have been altered beyond recognition by thousands of years of human habitation. There are now very few relatively intact natural areas in what was once a heavily wooded region. Paleoclimate. Because of its latitudinal position and its landlocked configuration, the Mediterranean is especially sensitive to astronomically induced climatic variations, which are well documented in its sedimentary record. since the Mediterranean is involved in the deposition of aeolian dust from the Sahara during dry periods, whereas riverine detrital input prevails during wet ones. The Mediterranean marine sap-rappel bearing sequences provide high-resolution climatic information. These data have been employed in reconstructing astronomically calibrated time scales for the last 9 ma of the Earth's history, helping to constrain the time of past geomagnetic reversals. Furthermore, the exceptional accuracy of these paleoclimatic records has improved our knowledge of the Earth's orbital variations in the past.